Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
When a man's belongings turn up over 100 miles from his home and his family is unable to get in touch with him, they begin to worry about his well-being and contact police. As more time began to pass with still no sign of the missing man and few leads to work, authorities will have to seek the public's help to uncover the truth of what's happened. Today's case is about the mysterious disappearance of Mickey Brougham. It was a hot Friday afternoon on June 25, 2010 in Belchertown, Massachusetts. Michael Brougham, better known as Mickey, was driving around his hometown when he happened upon his nephew Adam, a local police officer. Adam was working a traffic detail, and as Mickey drove through the intersection, he stopped to chat with him. "Hey, do you want a water or drink or something?" Mickey asked. Adam replied, "No, Uncle Mickey, I'm all set, thanks though." Mickey said goodbye to his nephew and went on his way. But after this encounter with Adam, Mickey Brougham would never be seen again. Mickey Brougham was well known in Belchertown. He'd been a well-liked and active member of the community his entire life, having worked for the water department in the past, plowed snow in town for years, and ran a reputable excavation business, Brougham Excavating, since at least 1994. It's a bit unclear as to when the business was opened, but he'd been operating it for at least 15 years by the time our story begins in 2010. The Brougham name was recognizable as it seemed their roots ran deep throughout the community. Mickey's father Harry had also been a town employee for decades and was even named Belchertown Citizen of the Year in 1999. Mickey's brother Gary was, and still is, the town administrator for Belchertown. Mickey had a wonderful relationship with his parents, Harry and Rita, as well as his 5 siblings, Carla, Cindy, Francis, Gary, and Brian. He was the middle of the 6 children, and they all kept in constant contact with each other. They were an extremely close-knit family unit. At 54 years old, Mickey wasn't married and didn't have any children of his own. He was a hard worker and enjoyed spending his free time with his family and attending Nascar races. On Thursday, June 24th, Carla, one of Mickey's sisters, had spoken with him on the phone and asked if he'd be willing to come over to her place that coming Sunday, the 27th, to help her with some landscaping work she needed done. The two confirmed the plans and decided Mickey should also stay for dinner once he was done. It was the least Carla could do to pay him back for his assistance with the yard. The next day, Friday, June 25th, was a normal Friday in New England during the summer. Nearly 85 degrees out and humid as heck as it always is here. It's reported that Mickey had spoken to his mother that morning, and the conversation the two had was normal. She would mention that Mickey didn't indicate to her that he had any plans for the weekend. Like I said, it was just your ordinary Friday. At some point, Mickey went out for a drive and wound up seeing his nephew Adam, that I mentioned earlier, while he was working that detail. I haven't seen it reported anywhere about where he may have gone. His movements after that point are just non-existent. At first, his family was none the wiser to the fact that he'd disappeared, until Rita, his mother, had tried contacting him again the next day on Saturday, June 26th, and had difficulty getting in touch with her son. It was completely unlike Mickey not to at least get back in touch with someone if he'd missed their call, especially his family. The whole situation seemed off to the Broughams, but he was a grown adult and didn't have to check in with them constantly, even though it was commonplace for him to do so. But either way, the lack of hearing from Mickey wasn't serious enough to warrant a panicked response. Not yet anyway. The following day, now Sunday, June 27th, was where things started to get really weird. We know Mickey had made those plans with Carla to help her with her landscaping. It's unclear what time the two had scheduled for, but either way, he never showed. And that same day, Carla got a call she wasn't expecting. Apparently, several individuals who'd been attending a NASCAR race at the New Hampshire Motor Speedway in Loudon, New Hampshire, contacted Carla and alerted her that they'd found some of her brother's belongings.
Well, that's strange. I thought he talked to his mom and said he didn't have any plans for the weekend. If they were so tight-knit, you'd think he would have mentioned it.
It is definitely strange. I would have absolutely expected him to tell his family that he was going to be traveling over 2.5 hours away and attending a big event like that. He loved that kind of stuff. He would have likely been excited to talk about it.
Putting aside how he ended up there, how would they know to contact his sister of all people?
Well, I guess there was contact information in Mickey's wallet for Carla, so that's why she's the one to get the call. It's reported that his wallet, which still contained all of his personal information, like credit cards and his driver's license, was left at the main gate of the Speedway. However, his cell phone and watch were found nearly a mile in the other direction around the north side of the Speedway. Why would they be in two separate places?
I could see his wallet being near the main gate if he had to pay to get in, but the fact that his phone and, more importantly, his watch were found elsewhere is suspicious. We can lose our phones pretty easily, but how often have you been walking around and have your watch randomly fall off?
Ooh, that's a good point. You'd have to think it was either specifically taken off or it was never on him in the first place. Once learning of the strange nature surrounding Mickey's located belongings, his family became more concerned regarding why they may not have been able to get in touch with him. They knew Mickey would have told them if he planned to go up to New Hampshire, but even if he hadn't, and this was all just a big misunderstanding, they'd hope they'd find him soon. With his whereabouts still unknown, family members traveled to his house where they were met instantly with confusion. Mickey's car and motorcycle were still in the driveway, but as they searched his property, he was nowhere to be seen. Why would his personal effects, things he'd need on an everyday basis, be over 2 hours away at this Speedway, but his means of transportation are still at home? How would he have even gotten there? He'd never drive with someone else. The Broughams were sure of that. Carla told the Amherst Bulletin, quote, "It's highly unlikely that someone would be driving him somewhere. That's not how he rolled," end quote. Now, some people may hear this statement and think, well, that's weird. Why does his family think he wouldn't have just gotten a ride from someone else? That doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility. But as someone who is the exact same way, I can fully understand what they're saying. I'm a control freak when it comes to driving. I always like to be the one in the driver's seat, not only because I totally get carsick if I'm not, but I just need to be the one in control. Honestly, I'll gladly volunteer to be the designated driver when out with friends, and I always want to take my own car. Even if Mickey would have agreed to maybe take a trip up to New Hampshire with someone else, based on what his family has said, it seems like he would have wanted to take his own car rather than drive someone else's. So if that were the case, you'd think his own vehicle would have been gone. But that's not what happened here. As we know, his car and motorcycle were left at home. So because of this, one might come to the conclusion that the car being left home is a key piece of evidence. Once Mickey's family discovered that he wasn't home, they immediately reported him missing.
We've seen this type of situation before, where an investigation would cross state lines. I'd assume that Mickey's family started in Belchertown, but once that PD received word of his belongings being found in Loudoun, they most likely reached out to the other agency for assistance.
And that's what seems to take place here. Based on what we know, his belongings were left in Loudoun, but that doesn't mean he didn't necessarily go missing from Belchertown. Because of this, it appears as though the two agencies worked together going forward. As their investigation began, authorities were met with peculiarities in Mickey's case. It's discovered that his cat was left at home by itself. No additional food left out, and no plans for anyone to watch it. But the most worrisome thing of all is the fact that his medication, which he needed to take on a daily basis, was left behind. You see, sometime before Mickey disappeared, he began struggling with his health. He'd been diagnosed with diabetes and coronary heart disease. The heart disease had become severe enough to require surgery. So, in January of 2010, he had a coronary artery bypass grafting, which left him with a very large scar along his chest and sternum. His health had gotten to a point where he was required to take daily medications for both his diabetes and the heart problems. So the fact that he's now nowhere to be found, and his important medicines aren't with him, just adds another reason for the family to be concerned for his well-being. They knew he would never leave on his own like this. Who knows how much his health could decline without them? And as we continue, I think it's important to note what Mickey looked like and distinguishing features and characteristics about him that may aid police in his identification. It's reported that at the time of his disappearance, Mickey was approximately 5 foot 6 inches tall, weighing anywhere from 190 to 200 pounds. He had that very large scar along his chest and sternum from his recent surgery, along with a wolf tattoo on his left shoulder. He also suffered from something called Dupuytren's contracture on his third and fourth fingers on both of his hands. According to hopkinsmedicine.org, this condition is, quote, an abnormal thickening of the skin in the palm of your hand at the base of your fingers. This thickened area may develop into a hard lump or thick band. Over time, it can cause one or more fingers to curl, contract, or pull sideways or in toward your palm. The ring and little fingers are most commonly affected. In many cases, it affects both hands, end quote. It was also reported that Mickey may have been wearing a chain necklace with a large scorpion pendant on it. I'll have a photo of what the pendant looks like on our socials and our website. All details will be listed in the show notes. And remember, quite a few of his items had been found at the New Hampshire Speedway, but this necklace was not among them. Mickey's sister tells the Amherst Bulletin, quote, it was very special to him, and it's missing. Just like him, it's missing, end quote. As the investigation continued, police's initial focus was on the New Hampshire Motor Speedway.
I'm sure they're wondering what the significance of this place would have been to him. Who did he plan to go there with, or was he ever actually even there?
Well, what's weird is that in the early days of reporting on the case, it seemed as though the media was purporting that Mickey may have actually intended to go to the NASCAR race that weekend. But earlier, I had alluded to the fact that he hadn't made plans outside of seeing his sister on that Sunday. And it turns out that was accurate. As Mickey's family gets more involved in the media and reporting on his case, it's stated that they were nearly certain he wasn't planning on going. Mickey was the type of guy to keep his family in the loop on what he was up to. You've got to think, with that many siblings and his parents all saying there's no way he wouldn't have told them he made plans, especially plans that far away, that's got to be taken seriously. That's 7 different people all corroborating the same story. As John's mentioned several times before in previous episodes, you have to take the family's feelings on the situation seriously. Are they freaking out? Are they certain this is unlike their loved one? Or is this a repeat offender type scenario? As police continued to investigate Mickey's mysterious disappearance, it became apparent that they weren't going to get much from the Speedway, because of course, they didn't use security cameras.
Ugh, that sucks. You'd think that in 2010, a venue holding such a large event would have some type of surveillance.
Makes things more difficult for police, that's for sure. Without the ability to review any camera footage, authorities had to trust in the people attending and hope that someone would come forward if they'd seen him. But based on reports, it seems as though there were no confirmed sightings of Mickey at the Speedway.
I'd assume investigators' next step, if they were still keen on the Speedway, would have to be to check his phone records to see if he had called or texted anyone about his potential plans to go there.
It doesn't seem like anything's been reported about text messages or calls Mickey made, but I did see it mentioned in an article or two that his phone had allegedly pinged in an area near the Speedway. I haven't been able to find anything regarding the cell phone pings, like where it pinged or really anything else about it, but it seems as though whatever authorities discovered led them to search in Loudon just days after Mickey went missing. The New Hampshire State Police, assisted by the Department of Fish and Game, would go on to search over 12,000 acres in the Loudon, New Hampshire area for any indicators implying that Mickey may have been there. The 2 departments would go on to use ATVs, as, remember, this is New Hampshire, likely lots of woods and rougher terrain. They would also utilize search dogs, helicopters, and all the manpower they had in the area to look for the missing man. However, after searching that much acreage, authorities turned up absolutely nothing, the first of many dead ends in this case. For several months after Mickey's disappearance, it seemed as though authorities had very little to go on. He essentially vanished into thin air. Once October of 2010 came around, another search took place in the same area investigators had hunted through just 4 months prior. However, this time, there were about 100 volunteers that came forward hoping to uncover new clues. And you'd have to think, I bet some of them were likely keeping their eyes peeled for that unique scorpion pendant. But unfortunately, yet again, this search yielded no results. As hope was beginning to wane, A PI from the Loudoun area volunteered his time and services to try and help the Brougham family find their missing loved one. Even with his efforts, they came up empty-handed real quick. How is it that someone could just disappear like this? That authorities, with all the resources they had at their fingertips, couldn't find a single thing? No verified sightings of Mickey have ever been reported, outside of that last one by Adam during his traffic detail. As time went on and reporting continued, albeit slower than in the first year or two of Mickey's disappearance, his family was interviewed by numerous reporters. Based on most of the articles written, it seems as though the family might have their own idea of what happened and who might be responsible. However, that's never been stated publicly, but the vibe they've put off during the interviews makes it seem as though that's the case. Carla told the Amherst Bulletin, quote, "I believe that he's been harmed, and I believe that there are people who have information that would be critical to solving the case. I pray that folks would find a conscience and find a way to come forward to share that information," end quote. The second-year anniversary of Mickey's disappearance would come quicker than expected. How could it have been so long without him? The family was still struggling to come to terms with the fact that he might never come back. So they gathered together and decided to host a blood drive in his name. His niece Molly, who helped to spearhead the plans for the drive, told Mass Live, quote, "What really gave me the idea for the blood drive was that close to Mickey's disappearance, there was a memory I had of him when he saved a woman's life by giving blood. He saved her during childbirth by giving his blood. Donating blood is a very good cause," end quote. It's admirable that Mickey, with his own health troubles, had done all he could to save others. Through the blood drive, his family members hoped to pass on his goodwill, while also bringing awareness to his case once again. During this time, while their actions did garner attention, no new leads were formed. When I first started researching this case, it seemed as though what happened to Mickey had something to do with him deciding to leave or, worst case, a medical emergency. But as I dug deeper, and the puzzling circumstances surrounding his car, medications, and cat being left at home, while his personal effects were found 2 hours away, almost instantly changed my mind. There was a statement in a Mass Live article put out by the chief of police for Belchertown, as well as the Hampshire district attorney. It stated, quote, "Investigators are treating the disappearance of Mickey Brougham as a criminal investigation due to the unusual circumstances. Detectives have interviewed many people and followed multiple leads. We haven't given up hope. People don't just disappear. It just doesn't add up that he took a vacation or left without telling anybody. At this time, there are no suspects in the case," end quote. So, if authorities were set on there being foul play here, I think that might make the public then ask more questions about the situation. Do police know more than they're saying? And what about this speedway? Is that just a red herring, or could it be a more concrete clue towards finding Mickey? I think when speculating on the speedway and its potential importance, there are two scenarios that fit. Either Mickey decided to go there, whether that be with someone else or by himself, or he never made plans to go and wasn't there the weekend of the 25th, and his belongings were only there as a distraction. I mean, there were likely tons of people at the race that weekend, yet not one person ever came forward to tell authorities they'd seen Mickey? Leaving his personal effects in New Hampshire seems like the perfect way to throw authorities off, at least at first. Let's not forget about the phone pinging in the area. It seems like that's what sparked the plan for a search, or was at least a motivating factor. But the pings could be totally unrelated to where Mickey actually was. Whoever had his phone could have very easily made a call from it while in the Loudoun area to make it seem like he was up there and then left his belongings at a place most people wouldn't question him being at. Regardless of what determination you come to regarding the items left at the speedway, it sure seems like investigators and the Brougham family all converged on the belief that Mickey met with foul play, and based on statements put out to the media, they know more than what they're willing to release to the public. But whatever they know doesn't seem to be enough to really make meaningful movement. There were no witnesses coming forward as having seen him, whether that be in Belchertown or Loudoun. There were no cameras at the Motor Speedway, and there's likely no DNA evidence to test, because there's no body, no struggle, nothing. Nothing amiss at his house or in his car. At this point, what could there even be to go off of without someone coming forward with information?
I know most of his belongings that were found at the Speedway were probably touched by a bunch of different people, but there's always a chance that touch DNA could be pulled from him.
Yeah, it's possible, but there would be a lot to rule out there. They could come up with a bunch of samples, but have nobody to match them to.
True, but when you're out of options, you have to exhaust all resources.
In recent years, police have publicly stated that yes, they are still working on the case, but there's really nothing new to report. Based on what's been put out to the media, we still don't know who authorities have interviewed. It's not like they have to release names, but it would be helpful to know how these people may have been associated with Mickey. Were they business associates of his? Friends? Family? Acquaintances he'd met through his hobbies? Any information that may give insight into who authorities had ruled out could help narrow down potential suspects. Another good question to ask is there information that hasn't been released to the public yet that could bring in new leads while also protecting the integrity of the investigation? It has been 12 years now. Maybe it would be good to put a little more out there that could jog someone's memory and entice them to come forward. Like they always say, it could be the smallest thing that breaks a case wide open. Or is keeping this information close to the chest an investigative tactic? If I'm honest, if that is the case, it doesn't seem like it's worked all too well. In terms of the current investigation, the DA told the Amherst Bulletin, quote, "It's an open investigation, although there really are no new developments and information to impart. You never know when a break may happen or someone might come forward," end quote. Unfortunately, because of the lack of specifics reported on this case, there aren't really many theories as to what could have happened, outside of what you'd expect in any missing persons case. Did Mickey decide to up and run away from his life, or did something more nefarious take place? The idea that Mickey Brougham wanted to leave doesn't really seem likely. From the outside looking in, when trying to decipher what may have happened, if he were to have ran away from his life, you'd expect to uncover things like unhappiness or personal and maybe even financial struggles. But based on everything we know, even though it's not that much, it really didn't seem like Mickey was dealing with any of that, outside of maybe his health conditions. But one reason that might lead someone to believe he left his life behind is the fact that his car and motorcycle were left at his home. At first glance, sure, this could seem out of the ordinary, but think about it. If Mickey wanted to run away and never be found, he wouldn't have taken the car that was registered to him that could be identified with a simple run of his license plate. He would have either taken someone else's car or maybe got a rental somehow. That way, it would be far more difficult to find him. And if that were the case, he wouldn't have told anyone about his plans. Like I said earlier, Mickey was the type of person who would keep his family in the loop on whatever he was up to. But if he was indeed trying to run away, he wouldn't have said anything. However, while working through everything, this may explain how he would have ran away, but there's still no significant reasons as to why he would have. It seems as though, logically, based on what had been left behind, Mickey never had a plan to leave. His medications were far too important to his health to travel without them.
I think that knowing when the prescription was filled and how many pills were still left in the bottle would help in deciding whether or not he planned to go somewhere without them. If the script had been filled the day before he went missing, but there were only a few still left there, he could have taken some in a different container.
Of course he could have done that. But you'd think, if that were the case, authorities wouldn't have said that whole bit about how they don't think he took a vacation or left the area without telling family or friends. I'd have to think authorities looked into that idea and checked his medication refills.
I agree. I just think that these are the small pieces of evidence that you have to look into when working through a missing persons case.
It just doesn't make sense that he'd leave his meds behind if he planned this whole thing. Also, I did a little background research on coronary artery disease and the types of medication used to keep the condition under control. From what I understand, it seems as though if someone suffers from this disease and they stop taking their prescribed medications, that could lead to a much higher risk of further complications or even a heart attack. So he'd be risking cardiac arrest or even death without them. Another strange piece to the puzzle has to do with the plans Mickey made with his sister. He spoke to her the day before he vanished and made specific plans with her to meet at her place on Sunday. Why would he set up plans to just never show for him? Sure, this was just helping his sister around the yard and a nice dinner together at home, but that doesn't mean he wasn't looking forward to it.
Well, you did say his sister asked him for help, right?
Yeah.
If that's the case and he was always willing to help, don't you think it'd be more suspicious for him to say no and then the next day he disappears? By making those plans, it makes it seem like everything was all fine and normal.
Okay, I'll give you that one. Maybe it's not all that sus when you look at it that way.
I'm not saying that I believe he planned to run away, just that, if he did, the best way to elude suspicion is to act like you normally do.
For sure, I agree with you. But also, let's not forget about his cat. He left it at home. Alone.
Who does he think this cat is? Kevin McAllister?
But for real though, as an animal lover, there's no way anyone who cared about their pet would leave them high and dry, with no additional food or water, and not plan to have someone at least come check on them in their absence. And even if he had planned to run off, I would imagine he'd have made arrangements for someone to take care of it, not just leave it to potentially starve to death. Overall, it's difficult to come to a decision on what may have happened to Mickey. Even when trying to imagine how he might have done it, we end up discrediting all of those ideas. I think the key to uncovering what truly happened lies in knowing more about Mickey's personal affairs. Maybe he did run off because he was afraid of repercussions from something he did or was involved in. Or maybe he got himself into a mess with the wrong type of person and they killed him because of it. But to narrow it down, you need to know more about Mickey, his past, the things he did, and the people he spent time with. So, I did some digging. At first, there really wasn't much that I could find. That is, until we got some help from Lexi. We recently joined an organization called Uncovered. They're a community-based platform looking to help those of missing and murdered people through collective impact. And they're a fantastic resource if you're looking for information on unsolved cases. We've loved being a part of the community, and if you're an avid true crime enthusiast, we think you'd love it too. We'll leave a link to their website in our show notes. So, anywho, I posted on the Uncovered page asking for some help. Lexi, of the Uncovered team, so kindly lent her research expertise and was able to find a couple things for me. Most importantly, she uncovered a court document regarding a sticky situation Mickey and his father had gotten themselves into a little over a decade before he went missing. At first, before I even started writing this episode, I was completely lost by the legal mumbo-jumbo used in the documents, and I chatted with John about the circumstances surrounding the whole thing. He, thankfully, has far more knowledge in this kind of thing than I do, so I'll have him give you guys a rundown of what happened.
So, this document comes from the Ethics Commission and stated that an inquiry was opened after learning that Harry Brougham most likely violated a Massachusetts general law outlined under Chapter 268B sometime during 1998. We know that Mickey's dad worked for the water department, as did he at some point. However, when Mickey was running his own business, he provided his work to the town, more specifically to the water department. Now, basically, when you're contracting work out for a municipality, it needs to go out to bid, which means that you need to get multiple quotes from different contractors and get the best price possible. But what seemed to happen in this case was that Mickey was being given work without it going out to bid. So, the town may not have been getting the best deal possible. You can't just provide all work to one particular company. It's not entirely clear if those involved knew what they were doing or if they were totally naive to the rules, but either way, it seems as though the Ethics Commission was satisfied that this wouldn't happen again, and the inquiry was dismissed a year later in '99.
See what I mean? This is not my wheelhouse of expertise, but that's a fairly concise rundown on what happened.
Now, just before we move on, something I found interesting that may lead you to believe that what happened was more of a mistake than a deliberate act is that even with Harry being involved in all of this, he was still named the Belchertown Citizen of the Year in '99.
Yeah, it doesn't really seem like a plan they'd set in motion to rip off the town or anything like that. So, with all of that knowledge, it makes you wonder if Mickey could have been involved in something similar again in the future. If Mickey was used to getting tons of work from the town and it quickly dried up after the inquiry, maybe he got involved with some unsavory characters to try and make some money. It seems like whatever happened could have had something to do with business ties, and in turn, maybe money? None of his business dealings have ever been made public outside of this Ethics Commission thing we were able to dig up. But it doesn't mean that he couldn't have been struggling because of this. He could have gotten himself into some sort of financial mess, and when the time came to pay up, maybe he wasn't able to do so. I mean, he did just have surgery 6 months prior to his disappearance. He could have been struggling to take jobs while recovering. I don't know the specifics of his business and if he was the guy actually doing the excavation work, but if he was, I'm sure he couldn't do as much as he used to, at least during his recovery. Like I mentioned before, it seems like the family may know more, and they certainly have their own opinions on who could be involved. If his family always knew where Mickey was and what he was up to, they had to have some knowledge of his business and personal life. If they knew who he hung around with or who was doing business with him, they likely have an idea of if those are good or bad people. There have been some comments made to media sources that I've kind of personally read between the lines on. One of his sisters told the Amherst Bulletin, quote, "I am more convinced every day I replay it, that something happened to him here in town and that some people know. One day we'll learn," end quote. And the second passage I found related to them potentially having an inkling as to who may be involved was from Mass Live. It stated, quote, "We feel very strongly that there are people who know exactly what happened," his sister, Cindy Brown, said Monday. She declined to name those people, who she says reside in the Belchertown area, end quote. I was also curious about Mickey's house that he owned. In 2013, there was an article published explaining that the family had continued to hold on to the property in hopes of Mickey's return. It appeared as though by the time 2017 rolled around, the family had finally decided to sell the property. I wanted to see the history of the ownership and exactly when it was sold. I checked out the Mass Land Records site and was able to see that it went to probate because Mickey obviously couldn't sign his ownership over, so the right to sell real estate was granted to his brother in 2017, and they proceeded to sell the property that same year. As I was looking at this information, something else caught my eye and piqued my interest. In 1986, it looks like there was a mortgage listed for $50,000. But what's weird is in some places, it looks like it could have been a mortgage from Mickey's parents to him, or maybe even a mortgage given from Mickey to his parents. Honestly, the verbiage on these documents almost contradict each other when you compare them. But if I had to guess, it looks like the mortgage was given to Mickey, namely because the parcel of land described in the document states Jabish Street, which was where Mickey's house was located. But regardless, the thing that seems strange about the mortgage is that it was paid in full in '98, the same year that Mickey and his father were embroiled in this ethics commission situation. There also wasn't an interest rate or payment agreement listed within the document, so that makes the fact that the mortgage was paid in full, potentially without any payments having been made all those years, even more odd. And mind you, this is all public information. Anyone can look this stuff up online. At first glance, if this were just any old property and person you were looking up records for, I don't think this would jump out at you. I mean, there were 12 years between when the loan was given and when it was paid off. But now this had me thinking, could Mickey have had some sort of influx of cash in '98 to pay the loan in full, maybe obtained during the ethics investigation? So then, if you fast forward 12 years, could he have somehow become entangled in a less than legitimate business partnership that may have led to his disappearance?
Well, I mean, you also can't rule out the idea that whatever happened was a total accident. Mickey did have a serious heart condition. He could have had a heart attack or something and died while in the company of people who didn't really care about his well-being. If something like that happened and he had been with some unsavory characters, perhaps they just disposed of his body rather than seeking medical attention for him.
That's totally possible. And then you'd think that his phone, wallet, and watch being at the Speedway was just a way to quickly get rid of them, but also throw police off. The family thinks whoever did this is from Belchertown, so it would make sense to take his stuff further away to avoid searches in the real area where this all went down.
Exactly. And if the people Mickey had been with knew anything about him, they'd be aware of his love for NASCAR. They could have learned of the race in Loudon, decided to dump some of his belongings there to make it seem like he had attended, and then did God knows what with his body.
I can totally get behind that idea. You never know. Whoever Mickey was with could have had a record, and then when he all of a sudden dies when with them, they could have panicked and not known what to do. I think that coincides with what the family had said too, that someone knows what happened or has more information on what happened, and they should do the right thing and come forward. At the end of the day, outside of all the speculation on what could have happened to him, it's not fair that the Broughams have had to go almost 12 years without their Mickey. That, at the very least, they aren't able to know where he is and if he's alive or not. Based on what we've talked about, I believe Mickey is dead, and somebody knows more about the circumstances surrounding his death. Whether that be that it was an accident or on purpose. The family held out hope for so long that he'd return, and over a decade has passed without him. His father passed away in June of 2020 without knowing what happened to his son, and his elderly mother still carries the burden of the unknown. And as for his siblings, who are all so close to him, it's gotta be heart-wrenching to not know where your brother is, after having such a great relationship and it ending so abruptly. Mickey's sister Cindy told the Gazette in a recent article, quote, "After 11 and a half years, it often feels like Mickey has been forgotten as new stories keep happening. And yet for us, it is real every day that he is not with us. We need to know as much as we can about what happened and would like to see justice," end quote. What I think is the most important thing here is to keep Mickey's case alive, to talk about him and alert the public of important information. You're all aware now of what Mickey looked like when he went missing. We have a ton of New England listeners. Were you at the Motor Speedway in June of 2010? Did you see anyone resembling Mickey? Check your photos. Is he in them? Have you ever seen that scorpion pendant? Were you out in the woods of New Hampshire or even the Loudoun area where those searches took place and found something that looked like it? Without us talking about this, less people will know what to look out for. Mickey's case was recently added to the Massachusetts cold case deck of cards, and he's the 6 of hearts. Hopefully, with that renewed attention and more people talking about him, it'll finally answer some of the questions his family has grappled with all these years. There's a $50,000 reward for information that leads to finding Mickey. His sister Carla told WWLP, quote, "Any information, seemingly no matter how small, can be very, very valuable to the investigator to understand A, what happened to Mickey, B, where his remains might be, so we can move forward with closure." If you know anything about what happened to Mickey Brougham or where he might be, please call the Northwestern District Attorney's Office at 413-586-5150. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.